You know that expression, you should have been here yesterday? Well, you should have been here 5 minutes ago. Well, you may not have wanted to be here 5 minutes ago because the poodles were having a riot, but you might have wanted to be here just 2 minutes ago because we looked up and we saw a peregrine falcon flying overhead. Now, in days of yore, that would have been a very special sight. In the early 70s, when I got massively into birds, peregrine falcons were extraordinarily rare. They'd been persecuted, they'd been killed during the war because they were predating message carrying pigeons, and then they'd gone through the awful pesticide crisis post war, all of the eggshell thinning, so on and so forth. And there was thoughts at this time, talking mid 70s here, that we may have to captive breed peregrines to release them. And I used to set out on my summer holidays with what was then the Hawk and Owl Trust and warden peregrine nest sites on the Welsh coastline. Who'd have thought that just a mile away from my house now, they're breeding on a pylon, one of about 8 pairs that breed on Southampton water. And you don't have to be in a New Forest garden to see peregrine falcons any longer. They are a common sight in our city. In fact, the ones I see most frequently are walking to Southampton Central Station, and there's an office block opposite that, on top of which the peregrines nest. So wherever you are in the country these days, except from open spaces in the east of England, and even there, they're nesting on the cathedrals in the city. Norwich, of course, Norwich Cathedral peregrines, available to watch online, like so many of the others, are certainly worth catching up with. But keeping your eyes peeled in the garden is what will boost your list. Of course, 90% of the things you're going to see are those birds you see every day. But I'm just trying to think the last time I did see a peregrine. There's a great spot woodpecker flying over there now. It was about at least, it was before Christmas, the last time I looked up out of my garden and saw a peregrine falcon. So keeping your eyes peeled whilst self-isolating is definitely worth doing. Should we crack on to the skull? Not cracking the skull because it's a personal treasure of mine. So let's have a look at it. Here it is. Hold it up. There we are. Can you see that nice and clearly? There it is in profile. And then here it is looking down on the top of it. And then here we are, sideways. It's clear to see, I'm sure you recognise that this is a duck or a goose skull. But look at the beak. The beak is effectively twice as long as the head, and it's equally twice as wide at the tip than it is at its base. And the neatest thing of all, this is fantastic. If you can get a close view of that, I don't know if you can see that closely there now. Can you see that? Look at those little hairs that run around the edge of that beak. These are called lamellae. Yeah. And this, of course, and I know many of you got it right, is the fantastic skull of the shoveler duck. Now, in the UK, we typically see more of them in the winter time. They're a migratory species, and many of them arrive from further north in Europe. Lots come from Iceland to the UK. Some stay to breed. Got a population of somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 birds, 2,000 pairs that is. That was the last time I looked. It may have increased. Most of them are on the eastern side of the UK, and they're most common in the east of England. They like, what should we say, reed and sedge fringed, shallow, muddy waters, because muddy waters are where they do their great work with this bill. This is essentially a fantastic filtering tool. And the shoveler will dig into mud. It will sometimes dip its head under the water. It will sometimes dive, but not very often. But it likes dipping this into mud and then filtering that mud for the plankton that lives in it. They eat quite a lot of seeds, but I have to tell you that shovelers are also quite a carnivorous duck, perhaps amongst the most carnivorous of ducks. So they will eat things like beetle larvae, caddisfly larvae, even larger things like dragonfly larvae. So whilst most of the other Anatidae are vegetarian, or principally vegetarian, the shoveler is eating quite a lot of that. And of course, it's also filtering tiny animal plankton out of that mud as well, not just plant debris, algae, so on and so forth, but also small copepods, crustaceans, mollusks, and those sorts of things. So yeah, look at that. One more look at that bill. The bill is absolutely sensational. And it's, of course, what's given the bird its name. It's got a whole range of old names. Scopperbill was one, Shovelard was another, but rather annoyingly, for quite a long time, it was called a spoonbill, certainly throughout the Middle Ages. And this leaves us with no end of confusion because, of course, there is another spoonbill. So when we look through the ancient records going back to those Middle Age periods, when we, a lot of those records are coming from, catalogues of what was on the menu. When it says spoonbill, we don't know whether it was shovelers or spoonbills that people were eating. We think, however, that it was spoonbills and not shovelers, because wildfowlers apparently say that although they do or did shoot shoveler, that the meat's not very tasty, and they put it down to the fact that it's got this carnivorous diet. Sure, not too many people are shooting shovelers anymore, and they're not eating them either, but in the past that's what they said about them. So it's led to this confusion, and of course it wasn't until about the 1700s that we started to get our taxonomy straight and give all of these birds, which essentially, you can see why it's called a spoonbill, and you can see why the spoonbill's called a spoonbill. It wasn't very helpful. But from the 17th century onwards, we were, it was one name for one bird, and that makes analysing the historical records a lot easier. So quite smart things, the old shoveler. Another skull coming up tomorrow, maybe a little bit more difficult tomorrow because that was quite an easy one. At the moment, I'm going to do all UK species. I know we've got some people joining us from overseas. I have got some foreign skulls, of course, that I've picked up along the way and brought back home and sorted out, and so we might get those out at some stage. If you've got any questions, I should have said at the top, we now have the capacity to answer some questions. Megan is here standing behind the camera, and so if you ask any questions, she can pass them on to me. Before we do that, that's a poodle belching, by the way. I apologise, it was not me, honestly, it was a poodle belching. So if the plans for self-isolating bird club is growing daily. We're working with the fantastic Fabian Howson, who's doing all of this, mixing all of this through onto all of our platforms, man of many ideas and great technological know-how. We're going to invite guests. That's the first thing, because soon get sick of me going on about shovelers and lamelli and all of that. Gary Moore, who is a sound recordist for the BBC. You might have seen him on Springwatch if you're UK viewer. He's going to be joining us to do some birdsong, because at the moment, listen, distant blackbird, may not be picking that up. Robins, wrens, they're all kicking off. So we thought we'd get Gary out with his parabolic recording device to get some birdsong. So he's going to be standing in for me at some stage. Tomorrow morning, I've got an appointment at a wildlife hospital, which is currently short of volunteers. So I'm going to go and muck in and help launch an appeal for all of the wildlife hospitals, actually, which are out there. So Megan McCubbin will be standing in for me tomorrow morning. I don't know what she's going to be talking about yet, but she'll come up with something this evening or tomorrow morning, and she'll be also launching Skull of the Day. Now, we do want it to be far more interactive. We're developing that capacity. So what we've done is we've opened a Self-Isolating Bird Club Facebook group, and we'd like you to join that as rapidly as possible, because then you can send us things, drawings, photographs of birds, things that you need identifying, pictures of your own skulls. That would be quite, well, not your own skulls, hopefully they're still inside your head, but any skulls that you might have collected. And so then we can make it a lot more interactive. One other thing, I contacted a couple of artist friends of mine today, Darren Rees and Darren Woodhead. They haven't come back to me yet. Hopefully they've been out sketching in this fine summer spring weather. But we're hoping to do a bit of bird art as well. The sky's the limit. Here we are, all indoors, or as near indoors as we can be in our gardens, and there's still plenty of scope to engage with birds and wildlife, so that's what we'll be doing. Got any questions?
Yes, Lizzie Cushway says that her 14-year-old son has a roadkill pheasant head and wants to know what's the best way to deflesh it.
Well, the thing about bird skulls, what was the lady's name?
Lizzie.
Sorry, Lizzie. The thing about bird skulls is that even when they're pheasant sized, they're quite fragile. So what I used to do was let nature, that's a poodle digging up the lavender which I planted to feed the butterflies and bees in the summer. What I used to do was let nature take its course, and I used an old hamster cage with a plastic bottom, and I would put my skulls in there, and this meant that the blowflies, those flies that lay their eggs on meat and the larvae eat the meat, would come in through the bars, and then they would lay their eggs, and the maggots would do all of their work, and the delicate mouth parts of the maggot don't damage the skull. I then used to take them out, wash them, bleach them a little bit and dry them, and I found that the best way of doing it. I did on a couple of occasions try boiling skulls to cook the meat that was on them and then delicately remove it with a toothpick. Sort of poodle altercation taking place thankfully behind the camera. But do you know what? They were so fragile that I damaged them. So I would put them on a tray and put them in something where nothing like a magpie or a mouse or a rat or any other scavenging animal can take the skull away, and then you can get it. I mean, the professional technique, which I employed for a number of years, a birdsong going there, fantastic wren, just about 3 meters away, are Dermestes beetles. So Dermestes beetles are used by museums for professionally preparing skulls. And these beetles will eat anything, and their larvae will eat anything, including, unfortunately, all of your furniture and your clothes. So we used to have a colony of these living in a plastic dustbin in my parents' shed, into which I would dip the skulls, and they would do a beautiful job of preparing them. But unfortunately, at a certain point, the Dermestes, or otherwise known as carpet beetles, because they munch their way through any natural fibre carpet, escaped from the plastic dustbin in the shed and got into the house and did untold damage to my reputation as a young naturalist. So I think basically let nature take its course, and then delicate work with a paintbrush.
IJ Nature is asking, do all filter feeder birds have those interesting marks on the underside of their bills?
The lamellae, yeah, many do. If not necessarily externally like that. If you look at perhaps the greatest filter feeding birds of all, the flamingos, they have their bills upside down, and all of those lamellae, those filtering surfaces, are actually inside the bill, so you can't see them externally. I have a flamingo skull actually. It's not to hand at the moment, but perhaps I can get it out on another day and show you. And the flamingos have a little conical tongue which they pump very rapidly backwards and forwards, so that the water is drawn in to the bill and then pushed out over these filtering surfaces, and then the movement of that tongue and the water draws the filtered material back to the throat and they swallow it. So yeah, they do, but not always external that you can see.
This is quite an interesting one. Which bird, this is from Bird, sounds like it's saying, "What you doing?" repeatedly.
What you doing? What you doing? What you doing? I'm going to try and sing like, what you doing? Is it a high pitch? What you doing? Is it what you doing? What you doing? I mean, Jackie, that's a tricky one. What we typically say is that if there's a bird call as opposed to a song that you don't know in the UK, most people will say it's a great tit, because great tits have an enormous and inventive vocabulary. And I still get caught out by great tits now at this time of year. Go out in the woods and I hear something and I think, oh, what's that? And invariably, it's a great tit that's calling. So yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything more obvious. What you doing? What you doing? What you doing? I can't say. Maybe it's not saying what you're doing. Maybe it's saying, why are you doing that?
A question school. What's your favourite? Oh, poodles. What's your favourite bird and why?
So difficult to have a favourite bird. I mean, I've got 100 favourite birds in my top 10. Excuse me, Nancy. But I'd have to, if I were being pushed for a UK bird, I would say male sparrowhawk. They're dashing, they're incredibly quick. I get to see them relatively frequently, and they're astonishingly beautiful with their blue back and orange cheeks and beautiful barring on the chest. Where's my rifle? Where's my rifle, Nancy?
Tone Blakesley. I saw a bat at lunchtime today flying around an oak tree. It was actually chased for several seconds by a small tortoiseshell. Why would a bat be feeding at midday?
Well, I guess it's been a nice warm day. Maybe the bats. Yeah, Meg's is going to go and deal with the issue over here, the canine interruption. So it's a nice warm day. Bats are emerging from hibernation at this time of year. They shouldn't be flying around in the middle of the day. But what they frequently do is they will move from roost to roost, and sometimes they get caught short and just have to hang up in somewhere that's not entirely suitable, and then they will emerge throughout the course of the day. So it could be that. Why it was being chased by a small tortoiseshell, I don't know, but what a combo. Great to see a butterfly which overwinters as an adult in that flying form, and also, of course, the bat, which I presume was too small to eat the small tortoiseshell. Great sight, though.
Alan McFadden, why have long-tailed tits evolved such a long tail?
Very good question, isn't it, really? Not entirely sure I can give you the absolute answer to that one. I mean, obviously they use it for balance because they're quite a nimble bird. You'll see them hanging upside down, twisting and turning, so on and so forth. So there's no question that it's an asset in that department. But when we look at animals now, what we've got to think is that they've been evolving for some time, not necessarily a very long time, millions of years, but they've been evolving and they haven't finished evolving. So we're taking a snapshot of that species at this point in time. And sometimes when you look at things, the purpose for their evolution has gone, and it's probably gone down to us. Think of the Andean condor, this massive bill for opening the thick hide of that Pleistocene mammal fauna, all of the mammoths and mastodons and giant sloths and so on and so forth. And it's currently left with this massive bulk copper of the bill, which it doesn't really need anymore. And another example I often cite is that we know that puffins, have a purpose for their brightly coloured bills in the spring and summertime when they use them for displaying to one another and displaying to other puffins. And we see their billing displays as being important. But why have they got bright orange feet in the spring and summer? They're brown in the winter, so investing, whatever the substances are to produce that colour in springtime has a cost to them, and there must be a reason for it. But they don't seem to use their feet for displaying like some other birds with very colourful feet, the blue-footed booby, for instance, do. So maybe they did, or maybe they are going to. So anyway, it's quite a sort of an ambiguous answer to why has a long-tailed tit got a long tail. I think it's probably balance more than anything else. It's not like they're mammals and they curl their tail around them to keep them warm. In fact, when they're incubating in the nest, very often when you look into a long-tailed tit's nest, you can see the little face of the bird and the tail's pointing out of the nest hole above its head, which I've always thought was a little bit tatty, to be quite honest with you. One more.
Okay, so Sinead Wilson is asking a question for Logan, who's aged 6. Our resident woodpeckers are very busy pecking at the moment. Why do they peck?
Okay, so I think, Logan, your woodpeckers are probably drumming if you're hearing them go drrr, drrr, like that, which isn't pecking for food, it's advertising their territories. And the great spotted woodpecker at this time of year finds a particularly resonant branch, and it drums its head at it about 15 to 18 times in half a second. And that can carry a distance of 3 kilometres at least, depending on the wind, of course, and how many other trees there are in the way. But yes, so that's what it's all about. In fact, I was talking about woodpeckers last night, and they, the enormous impact that drumming your head against a hard piece of wood can have, and how sometimes we perceive that as being a negative thing for the woodpecker. But you can catch up with the woodpecker information by watching what I was talking about last night. I don't really want to go over it all again. But they are, it brings us to a neat conclusion, as I was saying last night, one of those species, and I'm pleased you've been hearing them today, Logan, which are active at the moment, moving into spring. Drumming's going to increase, and they're still coming to the bird feeders. So a great opportunity to photograph them, paint them, maybe even record that drumming, and send it into our self-isolating bird club Facebook group, and therefore we can post them all and have a look at what you've got. I think that's way too much for me. I think I've been talking way too much.
Well, there are lots of requests to see Naughty Nancy.
Naughty Nancy, yeah. Okay, and I think that's pertinent because I mean, I don't want to sort of finish on a downer, but you know, this is all about real life now, isn't it? Really, a different type of real life, and our lives have changed, and they're still changing on a daily basis. But just to be very honest with you, because I'm an honest sort of bloke, what Megan and I are going to have to do now that we finish this little live broadcast is take Mr. Sid indoors and clean his bottom. Because the poodle is a remarkably intelligent dog, easy to train, very willful, extremely loyal, but their tight curly coat is not an asset when they have loose stools. And Sid has had very loose stools today, and as a consequence, Megs and I have got to take him inside and shampoo his nether end. And that's the reality of the Packham household on this lovely spring evening. So, by all means, Meg, show people the poodles, but they
On that lovely note,
they are in disgrace. Right,
it's up there.
Megs, I'll see you in the morning. I'll see you perhaps tomorrow night. Okay, good luck with the skull thing. A bit trickier tomorrow. Send your stuff in. Join the Facebook page. Thank you, group. Thank you very much.
And here's the dogs. Naughty Nancy. And Naughty Sidster.
Don't show them his rear end.
I'll stay well away from his rear end, I think. Oh.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.